I was working for a company that helped hoarders, meaning we cleaned their houses, apartments, etc., and provided counselling for those who had habits of hoarding. It wasn't exactly what I'd call fun, but it was steady work, especially in the city and some of the outlying towns. I can honestly say that I have seen some very nasty things in the last 4 years that I've been doing this. It tends to range from things like collection of birdhouses to tons of boxes, to just flats of outright garbage and malnourished animals. The animal hoarders tend to be the worst. They usually have some sort of mental thing where they think they're going to save all the stray and abused animals of the world, and they tend not to have enough money to care for them. The animals suffering tends to be greater because the person who takes them in can't care for them, and it makes a vicious circle. But this story isn't about that. This story has to do with the house that I helped clean out in the squatter's corner, which is mostly old farms and one gas station, one cop, one mayor, and a volunteer fire department. They had a school that went canine at one point, but the school had to be closed by the Board of Education a few years ago due to lack of students. Anyway, the owner of the house, a Thomas Howlett, had been getting on in years. He was unable to take care of the farm, and he had let it fall into despair. He had apparently lost his marbles sometime in the 70s, and would have been 40 years younger, and had taken hoarding as a way to cope. When we arrived, an ambulance was out there, wheeling an old man out on a stretcher. He was moaning and groaning, saying something about impending doom and the end of the world. Andrea, the boss lady, got out of the van and spoke to the EMTs. They told her that he was being taken to the hospital for a mental evaluation, and that he may not ever come home. She told them that we were there as per court order to clean up the property, and the EMTs said okay. They see this kind of thing every day, so it's no skin off their noses. We got out of the van, we being Donald, Henry, Josh, Rosemary and Cotton. We stretched our legs and took a look round, and we saw weird symbols painted in red on the house, the barn, the workshop and the storage shed. I don't quite remember what it was, just kind of unusual and kind of menacing, I guess you could say. We entered the house, latex gloves and respirators on. One thing for sure, once you had a job doing this kind of work, your place tends to be spotless. We came in through the door and we were immediately taken aback. The house was full of trash, old magazines, newspapers, boxes, computer equipment, old calendars, rotten food, dead animals, old clothes. It was overwhelming. We had taken this job per court order since the county was going to auction this place off. We all sighed, shook our heads and started cleaning. After moving some of the debris into neat piles on the living room floor, we each picked a room. I took the kitchen, Donald took the bedrooms, Cotton took the bathrooms, Rosemary took the garage. Josh was going to work with one of us, but Andrea said something about the cellar underneath the house that needed to be cleaned. Josh went ahead and took it. While I was in the kitchen, I noticed that Mr. Howlett didn't own a microwave and that the fridge was at least 30 years old and not plugged in. The kitchen had the unusual refuse, eggshell and cartons, coffee grounds, coffee cans, food wrappers, tea bags. It was very, very disgusting. I decided to check the fridge just to see what needed to be tossed, and found that weird symbol drawn at the back of it behind a block of cheese that was covered in green furry mould. I bit back bile because this kind of thing never gets easy, and you never get used to it. We were all discussing whether or not we should take a break, when Josh came running through the door, out of breath, pale and very shaken. "What?" Andrea began, but Josh cut her off. "The cellar, bodies, blood, come quick." We all followed Josh down the cellar, which at first just looked like a deep dark hole. We turned our flashlights and began trying not to vomit. Down in the cellar, there were maybe around 30 dead bodies, all of which were in various states of decay, along with a few skeletons and even a coffin or two. We immediately called the sheriff's department. While talking with deputies, we learned that some of the bodies had bites taken out of them. There were missing lungs, livers, hearts, brains. The skeletons had been chewed into too, and there were strange symbols painted on all four walls, and it was also carved into the concrete of the cellar floor. About 2 weeks later, after that, I quit cleaning hoarder houses. I also found out that Mr. Howlett had killed himself in the hospital. Apparently, he had moved the legs from his glasses and stabbed himself in the neck repeatedly, bleeding out. And according to the police reports, there was a strange symbol drawn on all four walls of his hospital rooms. So, a little background. I'm a small female. I was 16 and it was late winter, and it always got super dark very early. On this day, I was walking home from my friend's house. It was something like 7 miles from mine, but I preferred to walk than catch the bus. I did it many times before, however, every time I would have to walk past this real big park. It looked more like a forest than anything, and always gave me the creeps. So I left our house at 6 and left a little bit later than I should have, but we were binge watching a new TV show. As I was walking, I got this feeling in my stomach that someone was watching me. I could feel my whole body tense up, so I took my phone out to call my friend, but the battery was dead. The person following me must have noticed that, because a few moments later I feel a hand grab my shoulder. In that moment, I felt all of the blood drain from my head and run cold. I turned around, a tall, greasy man with yellow teeth smiling at me. "Where are you going, little girl?" he asked me in the most sickening tone, and I told him I was going home from a friend's, but my house was just past the park and it was in sight. I pointed at the house with the lights on downstairs. "That's mine, just there." His face scrunched up and he looked panicked. "Well, I'll just walk you home then." I said no thank you, but he insisted. I couldn't let this guy walk me home because that wasn't my house and I still had a while to walk. So I pushed his hand off my shoulder and I ran as fast as I could. I looked back for a second and saw the man break into a full sprint with a terrifying grin on his face. There was no way I was going to outrun this guy, so I ran into the park to see if I could lose him. I turned some corners and I lost him for a bit. I heard him cackle and shout, "I'm going to find you." So I dived into the nearest set of bushes. Unfortunately, this was not a good plan as I found myself rolling down a steep ditch and cutting my leg open all the way from my knee to my ankle. It seemed like a place where people dumped their junk down, and I caught my leg on the way down on a piece of scrap metal. I was rolling down this ditch. I was bleeding and I was terrified that I was going to be found by this creep and he was going to find me and kill me. So I waited, and then I heard him. I made sure I was completely silent and I listened to his panting. He sounded angry and let out a scream, followed by a "Come back, you little bitch." He thought I'd kept running and started running up the path again. I sat there shaking, my legs were numb. I couldn't even feel my leg bleeding. After a bit of just sitting there and getting my nerves in order, I was ready to get up and crawl out of that ditch. Then I heard crunching footsteps on the path again. He had come back, and at this point, tears started streaming down my face. I really thought I was going to die. The footsteps stopped and almost stung this part. Come out, wherever you are." Then I got more agitated and started describing what he was going to do to me if he caught me. It made me feel like vomiting. And then he just walked away. I waited like 20 minutes or an hour, I don't remember, but it felt like the longest time I have ever waited for anything. After I was sure he was gone, I crawled out of the ditch and through the bushes, covered in dirt, twigs caught in my hair and a blood-soaked jean leg. Just to complete the look, I stood up with a shooting pain running through my left leg, but that wasn't stopping me getting out of there as fast as I could. Hobbling the rest of the way home, I finally got in and my mum chewed me out for coming back later than I said I would. And then she looked at me crying, covered in dirt and blood. I collapsed to the floor and choked out what had happened to me. She called the police and took me straight to the hospital. I had to have a tetanus shot and over 10 stitches in my leg. The cops never found that guy. I worry about the girls that might not have been as lucky as me. I don't find that part creepy anymore because it helped save my life. It's been 2 years since then and I have never walked home on my own in the dark ever again, and I always make sure my phone is charged. My dad is 65, the same age his father passed away, holding the same name he had, in a hospital bed during the surgery gone wrong. My father had open heart surgery 2 years ago, a quadruple bypass, and there is still many more blocked up. He was wheeled in only looking for a stint, but it was an emergency and he shouldn't have survived. A literal near-death experience, but he survived. Recently he pulled his hip and had to go and get surgery to take out a spur in his back. It took maybe 2 hours and the surgeon said everything went fine. They gave him some strong pain pills, muscle relaxers and all that. He couldn't keep his eyes open afterwards and we had to keep reminding him to wake up and breathe. Once he was awake, I left to get food and before I knew it, we were all home. He was tired and slept a lot. We talked to make him feel better and everything seemed perfectly fine. It was the day after when things got weird. I love the paranormal, horror, everything. I strongly believe in it, but he never had. The reason? His grandmother loved him to death. Literally, when she died, she promised him, if she could, she would come back and let him know. So far, she hasn't. The next day when he woke up, he remembered a feeling of someone tapping him 3 times on his wrist. He woke up but nobody was there. The next day he had dreams about rat tails swirling around, and when he did awake, didn't realise it, not being able to identify the fan on the ceiling and instead wondering what it was. He walked into the living room and had scratch marks on his cheek, bloody and all. We hadn't seen him in the hospital, so it was real new. Somehow, in his drugged up state, he also managed to walk the dog and put a jacket on her, even though he could barely bend over. When he went to bed, he felt it again, someone tapping his hand. And right after he woke up, my mum did just that. Tapped his hand. I insisted to him that this felt odd and joked about it being a ghost. This morning I felt it was a good breaking point to ask the internet what to do. He was making breakfast and my mother was in the bathroom doing makeup when he heard a scraping noise. So he turned around. As he did so, he watched a drawer from under the oven where we keep all of our pans slide out all on its own. No one touched it. No one was around. This was pre-drug, may I add. I just wanted to hear what you all think. Is it a spirit that we brought in, or is it just some hallucinational fantasy my father has been having? He continually insists there are no such thing as spirits, so what the hell is going on?